because I like questions. So we're all here. Anybody not? 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, including myself. I'm down on the list, I think, as speaking about walking the leys. Is that correct? Right, okay. Do you all know what a lay is? Who has heard of the term lay? Ah, right, so you know that. And who's a bit bemused because I'm not saying lay line? Because that's the first thing you got to learn. The term is lay, L-E-Y. Anybody who says ley line is ignorant, because it shows for one thing, they've never read the Old Straight Track by Alfred Watkins, and if you go through it, you'll never see the term ley line. It's always lay, and by definition, a lay is a line. You don't need to say line. And we're going back, well, to 100 years ago, in 1925, when a very respectable citizen of Hereford, he lived near the cathedral and was hobnobbing with a bishop, a great antiquarian. His family, his money was in brewing, and he used to go around with his on the old brewer's dray around the county of Herefordshire and into what we now call Powys, old Radnorshire, and selling his beer. And a great antiquarian and a photographer. He invented a light meter, and he's got a room to himself in the museum in Hereford. His name was Alfred Watkins. I think he was born in 1855, Victorian, and a very proper person, very highly respected. Not a weirdo, not like me. And he wrote a book. Well, go back 4 years before to 1921, 30th of June 1921. He had a revelation, a flash, a vision. He was at Blackwoodine Crossroads, which was between Hereford and Leinster, if you know that part of the marches, on his one of his expeditions, and he just saw in a flash a pattern of lines, of leys, through the landscape, formed by old standing stones and burial chambers, old barrows, mounds. The first chapter of the book, The Old Straight Track, is not about standing stones, it's about mounds, artificial hills or hillocks, and old churches, holy wells, particular trees, especially the Scots pine, and these would line up. And they'd often line up in the distance. You'd see a holy hill, and if you lined it up, if you took a compass out, you would realise it would be 50 degrees, for example, would be the rising of the sun at the summer solstice. It didn't have to be then. It could have been Beelzebub or May the 1st, or any of these things, but they're all of significance. And now this is, well, he was a Victorian, but you're talking about now the 1920s. And people were being rational, academic. You get these new schools of things like archaeology, and people would define things. They'd say, there's a Stone Age, there's a Bronze Age, and so forth, and categorize things. people who thought they knew what was what. They were professors at universities. They were proper people. So you didn't question them. This is when you have things like evolution, Darwin, and people who, some of those labels they gave are false. In fact, most of them, when you look into them, they're falling off because could be totally false. One term I just mentioned now, going back to about 1700, you've heard about the Celts. Do you think we're Celtic? Do you think we here in this West Britain, at Penmaen Mar, do you think this is Celtic land? Celtic fringe, they call it. Well, most people do. They blithely write about Celtic. The Celtic saints, Old Tidno. Lot of nonsense. It's all wrong. We were never Celts. If you asked old Malcolm Gwynedd in 517, or before he died in 547, he would have not recognised the term Celt. The Celts were a tribe down in southern Gaul and in Switzerland, known to the Romans. The Romans wrote about the Celts, and they wrote about a separate people called the Britons. We're the British, and we're the West Britons, never Celts. But these academics, and they're talking, you've heard of Edward Lloyd. You go to East Edward, in the Flyfell, and there's a Cymdeithas Edward Lloyd. They have a tent for him. He's famous because he went to Oxford. And this is talking about 1700, late 17th century, early 18th century. And he was one of those with Elias Ashmole. Anybody here been to Oxford? You've been to the Ashmolean Museum, where King Alfred's jewelers and so forth, and Guy Fawkes' lantern, and Pocahontas' mantle, and all these things. Elias Ashmole, who founded the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, the oldest museums in the country or something. He was a great friend of Edward Lloyd, the Welshman. Was he Radnorshire? Anyway, and they decided that we were Celts. And it's only since about 1700 they got this misnomer. People started talking about us as Celts. They got it wrong. So always question. Don't assume. Okay? Well, these clever people who knew what's what were deciding on their dogma, writing their books. And they had come across these standing stones or burial chambers, whatever, in the countryside. And people would say, well, what's that all about? Who put them up? Why? And so Alfred Watkins, the antiquarian and brewer, going around the countryside, using his eyes and using his camera to take pictures, which focused him on the countryside. He was part of them, but standing aside, as it were, because he didn't necessarily subscribe to their dogma. But being a proper person, he would pay due heed to it. But he noticed that these stones all lined up. And he thought, oh, for one thing, this is a Christian country. He lived near the cathedral. He would take tea with the bishop. And also remember, in those days, this was before 1951, when Sir Winston Churchill was Prime Minister again. And Churchill, of course, as you all know, he was a Druid. You all knew Princeton Churchill was a Druid, didn't you? Sorry?
I knew he went to school with Alistair Crowley.
Okay.
Alistair Crowley.
Oh, yeah, Alistair Crowley, yeah, but...
they went to school together, didn't they?
Yeah, a different story. But Druid, I've met people who knew Churchill as a Druid. I knew a man, in 1980 he was 80. In 1940 he was 40. He was one of the pioneering vegans. And he was also Their undercover story was Naturist Club, because they do all the rituals skyclad. And there's a reason why. I learned these things. There's power in being naked. Just physical power and being skyclad. It's part of the thing. And but Churchill expressly commanded the man I met. He may have been called Bingham something, but he they would say a covenant witches. It was a grove of druids in the New Forest during the Battle of Britain in 1940 to raise the cone of power, telling Hitler, go away, do not come. He had all his invasion barges in Rotterdam ready to put his hundreds of thousands of troops on, and suddenly he changed his mind and didn't come. No, I'm going off at a tangent straight away. I'm here to talk about leys. I'm talking about the Second World War in Churchill. I'm good at that. And later on, we can get, please lead me astray again. Because it's Churchill who won the war. Now, you can talk all you like about the war, and I used to go to A.J.P. Taylor's lectures in Oxford when I was a student. And I'd agree with old Alan Taylor. But it was Churchill. Forget about all the other things. Yes, Stalin, the Yanks and all that. There's only one reason why we won the war and we defeated Hitler. Just let that fact sink in. Hitler lost. Hitler could have won. You could all now be speaking German and hail Hitler to each other. It'd be a very different world. We've been lucky in our lifetimes, have we not? Thanks to people like Churchill, the Druid, and because he served the goddess above all, against all other advice, that we won the war, because it was Churchill who sent the troops into the Balkans, into Greece and Yugoslavia in the spring of 1941, when everybody said, what a stupid decision. And of course, we did lose 50,000 men and all their materiel. We almost lost North Africa and the Suez Canal at the same time. All because obstinate old Druid Churchill knew he had to do it because the goddess told him so. But if he hadn't have done that, we'd have lost the war. Because Hitler was intending to spring Operation Barbarossa on Stalin that very spring. And then he was distracted by that ruddy old Druid Churchill. And Operation Barbarossa was delayed a crucial 7 weeks. So he didn't invade Russia, or the Russian part of Poland, until the summer solstice, 22nd of June. Stalin didn't want to know about his so-called friend Hitler invading him. The very night before the German tanks rumbled across that border, Stalin was sending munitions trains the other way to Germany, sending Germany ammunition. Because they were friends, they signed a peace treaty. That's how clued up Stalin was. So Hitler said, thank you very much for the bullets, now we're going to fire at you. And because he did it on the 22nd of June and not on the 1st of May, because of old Churchill buggering things up in the Balkans, he was too late. And by the time he got to the gates of Moscow, it was snowing. And Lady Winter took over. And the Russians were now shivering. The German army was now shivering. They hadn't got the right clothing. And instead of winning the war, which they could easily have done if they'd have started when Hitler wanted to, Stalin was able to recuperate and come back to life, move his factories down the Trans-Siberian Railway, and then eventually return to enter Berlin in 1945, with all the rest is history. But none of that would have happened if it hadn't been for Churchill the Druid in doing the stupid thing of invading Greece where he did, because all his generals would tell him, no, don't do that, it'll be a disaster. But he was a Druid and he had a dream, and the goddess told him, this is what you must do. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about the Second World War, am I? I'm here to talk about leys, and that happens to involve Druids.